Wanderlust is this very personal, high touch, almost a spiritual experience for the people who attend. And to be able to produce not one, not three, but 60 something of them around the world and not lose something in the process, I think is actually impossible. I just think something of the magic was lost and it became kind of a grind. Somewhere along the way, what we didn't question is why be big? There is an allure to bigness that is inherent in the human mind and perhaps anyone who's ever run a business. And the problem is you really need a why for that.
Most people chase success thinking that it's going to make them feel fulfilled inside. Sean Hess actually reached success more than once, and each time it left him feeling more and more disconnected. Sean is the co-founder of Wanderlust, the wellness festival, and the creator of a new health and wellness summit called Eudemonia that brings together world-class thinkers, scientists, and seekers. But before all of that, Sean was a burned-out lawyer chasing external wins until life forced him to stop and reevaluate what was most important. In this episode, you're going to learn what to do when your mission starts to feel like a job, how to navigate an identity crisis when your business outgrows you, how to catch the quiet signs that it may be time to let go, even when everything looks fine on paper, why growing your vision can cost you control, and how to protect what truly matters the most to you. But first, let's dive back into Sean's early days as a science-loving introvert raised by divorced parents in rural New Hampshire, where he first learned to be self-reliant, creative, and quietly rebellious. I'll put timestamps below in case you want to skip around, and let's dive in.
Sean Hess, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Leigh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. So I love researching people who are sort of like in midlife because you see the journey and oh my God, he's been through all these things and you can just imagine the lessons that you've learned along the way. And so I'd love to spend some time talking about the early days of your life and then the early days as a creative and entrepreneur and wellness thought leader. And if you just look at it on paper, yeah, there's all these isolated sort of events, things that happen where you turn lemon into lemonade. But when you peel back the layers, there's always a thread of connection between all those things, right? Even stuff like producing a band and how you deal with something that happens at a wellness festival that's unexpected. You got that idea from something that happened, 10 or 15 years ago. So anyway, so I'll be asking questions about that. I always like to start talking about childhood though. So if you can reflect back to your earliest memories, did you have a favorite toy or activity as a kid?
Geez. I guess I'll go with the first thing that pops into my head. My mom actually got me a stuffed whale when I was about like a blue whale or something it was. And that was followed by I think it probably lasted 5 or 6 years, an obsession with marine life. So I then ended up with a stuffed shark, a stuffed lobster, and a stuffed seal. Those were my companions for many, many years in early childhood. And I actually incredibly vivid memories of them still, like where I was when I first saw them and had to have them and all of that stuff. And it actually, oddly, I spent, I would say, my first 15 or 16 years on the planet thinking I was going to be a marine biologist. Maybe not accidentally. But yeah, that's what pops to memory. I'm sure there are others. But I grew up in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire. My dad is Austrian from Austria proper, as in first generation. My mom is an American Yankee from the north part of New Hampshire, the hard scrabble northlands of New Hampshire. So they somehow found each other while she was touring around in Europe in the late 60s. And he was excited to move to the States and came out here. So yeah, I ended up in New Hampshire, which is where I am again now, as you can probably see from the trees
it's
in the background.
It's come full circle. So did you have exposure to the ocean or what was that about? What was the marine biologist thing about?
We have, I think we have 13 miles of coast, beautiful coast here in New Hampshire. So we have some, but no, it was actually, I don't know. Kids are funny. I have two of my own now and they're, what they glom onto and just become, I would say my dad has always been obsessed with nature and wildlife. And I shared that passion and my son seems to share that passion too. So I don't know if it's, genetically encoded in some way, but it certainly wasn't because we spent a lot of time at the ocean. That's for sure.
Talk a little bit about growing up. Like, what are some of the life lessons that you got from your dad and or your mom that kind of informed how you approached your late teens, early adulthood?
Yeah.
When they released you out into the world, they kicked you out of the nest.
Well, that happened a lot earlier back in the 70s where the helicopter parenting hadn't been invented yet. So I think I was on my own a lot more. I would say that both of my parents epitomize, a moral upbringing or strong moral upbringing, not necessarily strict in any, and certainly not even actually in any religious tradition, but just more that my dad was, extremely firm about telling the truth, about doing what you say you're going to do, and very much enforcing that, where I tried to not do what I was, what I had promised doing. My mom, I'd say quiet and, also very ethical person. And so, they both, I think, good, strong traditional values in some ways. My dad also was an entrepreneur. So he started a small business after he kind of found his footing. He didn't even really speak English when he first came over here. So he, sort of learned on the fly and eventually started a import export business, became quite successful at it. So I saw that growing up too, of him, going from a safe corporate job to, taking a risk on his own company, to struggling for a couple of years, to having success as a result. So it's a great role model. And actually my mom too, as I think about it, much later in my life, she had worked for a big, they made marine electronics, Raytheon. They're also a huge defense contractor, but she had worked in their HR department for many, many years and then quit absolutely one day out of the blue. Decided she'd had enough of the man, and basically started a home furnishing store on the seacoast in New Hampshire, and did that for a while and got into real estate. And now she's, retired. But it's funny. There's definitely a little bit of an entrepreneurial streak, I suppose,
Your
in my
dad
folks as
went
well.
first with the leap of faith, and then
Yeah,
your
he went
mom.
first when I was younger. Yeah. So he started, I think, his business probably when I was, I'm going to guess, 9 or 10. And so, there were some lean years. I grew up, fairly poor almost. It was like, it didn't really matter because New Hampshire is one of the most egalitarian places in the world in that sense. Like, there's not as many visible, I suppose, class or wealth differences as you would find in other parts of the country. But yeah, for a lot of years, right after my mom and dad got divorced when I was 6 and 7, and during those years, probably from 7 to 10, like both parents were struggling to make ends meet, newly divorced, and, one with a new startup business and the other one just suddenly having to fend for herself. So yeah, it was a great childhood, but it was definitely not one of great material wealth. A lot of time in the woods and just being a kid in that way. One of the formative things was actually probably being divorced, and, there was joint custody. And so my mom ended up living nearby, but she moved a lot in the early days. So I was going, to her house on the weekend, my dad's house, and so not seeing my friends. So one thing I had to learn very early on was how to be alone a lot. She would sometimes in the summers, when I was at her house, she would work during the day, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And, I would be there and I didn't know anyone because it was not where I went to school. I actually went to school where my dad lived. So, spent just so much time, trying to entertain myself, whether it's like reading books or carving things or building things or just whatever I could figure out how to do. That was another whole piece of it.
And what was your idea of success back in those early days when you were still living with either one or the other parent, and you were thinking about what you want to do in the world, and you were looking at your dad and mom and these entrepreneurial ventures? What did you see for yourself?
Yeah. I don't know. The earliest thing I wanted to be was definitely, I always said, if you had asked me probably until I was 20, I would have told you I wanted to be a scientist of some kind. I was really fascinated. I was like the geeky kid who, like, my mom would take me to the library and I'd check out books on chemistry, honestly. And I didn't even understand them, I don't think, but I just had this vision of myself that that's what I was supposed to do. Don't know why. It was none of my parents are that, none of my relatives are that, but it just was in my head. And I used to do like mix household chemicals and set things on fire and, try to pretend that I was the great alchemist creating, new metals. It's just something that I was always interested in. But yeah, success in that sense, like, I don't think I thought about it very much late. I was mostly interested in, I was expected to do well in school, and largely I did, but a career never really entered my mind. It was always like, what am I doing with my time? What can I do with my hands? What am I studying? What am I learning? It was never really about success or, anything external as much as it was just what am I interested in was the thing. As I got older, I became more interested in the arts and reading and literature and other things later in life. And so that kind of shifted me for various reasons off a path from, I think, the hard sciences, but I've always maintained that love and passion throughout my life.
And you were into music.
Yeah. Well, that was another transformational thing so around 13 or so, I started playing guitar and, all the things that people say about it back then when you start playing guitar. It was, first of all, it was just fascinating. And I loved the idea of being able to progress and make these beautiful sounds or sometimes horrible sounds in most of the cases in the early days. But, it was a conduit to a social life, which, as I mentioned, I was sort of always struggling with that a little bit because of my parents and also probably just because I'm at core kind of an introvert. And so yeah, I found music and joined a band and we started playing parties and high school dances eventually. It was super fun and definitely became the one thing that came on. I later, I obviously went to college and then ended up going to law school and did that whole thing. But throughout that time was also all playing music and sort of pursuing that passion on the side. So once again, I have a hard time settling probably on doing one thing. And music was like something it's very portable, I suppose, which is one of the good parts about it.
Were you a musician posing as a law student, or were you a law student just kind of moonlighting as a musician? Like, where was your heart?
I think I was posing as both, to be entirely honest. And I really mean that. I think I was a shitty lawyer, fairly to say, when I did become a lawyer and I passed the bar and I did all this stuff. But it's just my heart was never really in it. And I don't even to this day know why, because there's a lot of elements. The analytical side of law, I think, is fascinating. There's still things about it that I find fascinating, but the actual practice of law, I found so deathly boring. And maybe I wasn't in the right area of law, but it just, and this was one of the clear moments. I remember I joined a huge law firm, Skadden Arps, which has recently been in the news, I think, for kowtowing to Trump. I joined them and there was this partner who was really a great guy and super nice and sort of took me under his wing. But I remember having these days where I would just look at him and think, I have no desire to be you whatsoever. You have the brass ring. You're the partner. You're the guy. And I don't want to be you. Not even kind of. So that wasn't it. On the music side, I loved it and I worked so hard at it. But I think it was a little bit like, I don't know how to compare it, but, I was surrounded by people who were just exceptional musicians. I mean, my partner and friend, Jeff Krasno, and his brother, Eric, is just this like gifted guitar player, and so many other people that were in this New York music scene later as I started a record label with Jeff and did all those other things. And they were just so much better than I ever could be. And even though I became, I think, a proficient guitar player, it's like there's a bit of, I think, self-awareness or something where sometimes you have to be able to realize like, wait, I don't know that I have that little spark, that little, touched by the Holy Spirit kind of thing in my playing. Like I'm a good player, but I'm never going to be that. And so maybe this shouldn't be the career for me. Maybe I should help other people achieve that or something else, which is sort of what ended up happening. But I still play. I mean, there's a couple guitars sitting right over there inside the house and, I hack around.
That's the thing though, man. It's like, it's very difficult to self-diagnose whether or not this is supposed to be your path versus is this just some hobby and I should really stick with the thing that I'm earning a living doing. During that period, if you can remember working at the law firm, and this is back in like the John Grisham days, right? Like he actually totally he made working at a law firm sound exciting.
Yeah, much more exciting than it turned out to be.
You're being chased by bad guys. You're exposing corruption and all this thing.
Yeah.
So if you weren't pursuing law, you were trying to be in management consulting, working at Bain or Goldman Sachs or something, or you were working in finance in some capacity. On paper, it looks like you're moving in the direction of success, but are you constantly entertaining thoughts in the back of your mind like I need to find something else? Is that one of the signs that this is not really supposed to be your path?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think I have always felt that I'm a strong generalist and that of course I have some things that I'm more passionate about, but I sort of, my secret power, if I have one, is that I can do a lot of things competently, but I also didn't ever find that thing where I was like, oh God, you're just far and away better than everybody else at this thing. And, and I was also surrounded by people who clearly had that in one form or another. I mean, musicians being, one key example, but also, some of the lawyers I worked with or other people. And so I think I always felt somehow deficient a little bit about that just because, oh yeah, you're really good at this and you're really good at that and you're above average at this, but never having a clear calling, and also just maybe there's something clarifying about that. I don't know, clarifying for people who have it. And so I really just bounced around and tried a lot of things. And, then there was just more the emotional thing of like, how much do you love this? How much do you want to do this? And what I found was that the law, at least as practice as an associate, was not something that made me very happy. It made me fat and unhappy. In fact, I would say it was a fairly accurate description of what happened. And then, the music thing, I loved to do on a more casual basis, but the more serious it got and the more I started playing out and the pressure of performing and touring and some of those things that, or being in front of an audience, I didn't love that part of it. What I loved was like hanging out with my friends and being in a, late night in some basement somewhere playing music until 4 a.m. That to me was amazing. The more rigorous professional side of it, I didn't really love that either. So yeah, I mean, I think in some ways stumbling into being an entrepreneur was because as an entrepreneur, particularly in a startup phase, you kind of have to be able to do everything kind of well in order to get off the ground. And so it really suited my, monkey brain, for lack of a better word. And I found that I could always be endlessly entertained because there was always some other new aspect that I could learn or at least be somewhat good at it to push the thing forward. And so that became, I think, my entree into the world of trying to act through various strange small businesses.
So Jeff has been on the podcast a couple times. He's going to be on again soon to talk about his
Cool.
new book.
Yeah.
You guys have this meeting, that I've heard stories about him playing and you jumping up and playing the guitar or something like this.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about that moment and then how that led you all to start your record label?
Yeah, well, there's a little gap in between that because I think I was probably 19 when I jumped on stage and 29 or something like that when we started the label. But yeah, well, that was, Jeff, I mean, I was sort of, I guess, through music starting to find some new kind of friends and just be associated with different people. This was at Columbia in the late 80s, I guess this would have been, when I was there in New York City. So, and yeah, there was this whole scene developing with, Blues Traveler and Spin Doctors and all these like bands that were basically playing in the basements of fraternities at that time. But that was, a scene. And I had been playing for years and had left my high school band, obviously, to go to college and was looking around for people to jam. And so I started to go to where the kids who played music was. And I actually got there. So this was this place on 125th Street. And I walked in and I remember because I was just being, of course, super nervous, but I watched the band play and there's this guitar player, Gerald Lee, who was just like this ripping blues rock guitar player, just so good. And I was like, God damn, but despite being an introvert, I guess, it was one of those moments where either I'd had enough beers or I just was like, screw it. I want to meet some people and these guys are really good and I want to know them. And, I walked on stage and started rapping and one of the guys kind of knew me. He was like, yeah, he's a guitar player. Why don't you guys have a jam? And I got pushed on stage and it went all right. It went all right. It was fun. And, they all became my good friends. I played music with them for, decades in various configurations after that. And it's like one of those moments where I guess you just kind of got to stick your neck out a little bit. But I mean, very, very formative moment for us both. But that's how I met Jeff. And then, Jeff and I just became buds. He's a very chill dude. And, he just liked to sit around and, I guess in those days, smoke weed and play music all the time. And that was sort of what I was into that too. Less so in the weed than him, but also enough and more just like late nights of music. And it was just like always a scene around. He was part of this fraternity that had, all these really good musicians in it. And we just chill and play music. So, that kind of got me started. I think Dave Graham was like, Bill Graham's son was like the president of the chapter. So there was all sorts of like music royalty hovering around in the background, but not so much with me and the guys I was jamming with, but it was a cool time to be there for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then how'd you guys start the record label and who said, okay, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Did you have money saved up? Like, how did that work?
God, that was It's not something I would recommend necessarily the way we did it, but it's funny, Jeff and I, because we spent so many late nights playing music and, I'd say probably around the time we were 23 or 24, I was like, yeah, man, someday we should start a record label. Yeah, someday we should start a record label. And it was like sort of in those days where, I mean, neither of us had any idea, what it really meant, but we both were into it. I got a summer job, like, and when I was in law school, an internship for EMI Records. So, I had some experience inside the building there. Jeff was working for BMG, like, their big music label for a little while. And, we've got a little more serious about it in our sort of mid late 20s. I then was in law school, graduated, got my corporate job in law. And he, at that time, had been hooked up with, like, he had been playing music, like, professionally, semi-professionally, and sort of had hooked up with all these really cool, like, downtown, avant-garde jazz cats that were, part of the scene, the whole acid jazz movement that was going on in New York in the late 90s now. And he wanted to open a recording studio. And me being the jack of all trades, technically inclined science guy, I was like, oh, cool. I'll come and set up all the gear and I was making some money. So I invested a little money and basically I spent all my like nights and weekends hanging out in this downtown shitty recording studio that I helped him to put together. And it was hilarious. Like we sublet space from this horrible rehearsal studio called the Off Wall Street Jam, which you can imagine. It was like literally dudes, Wall Street guys playing Mustang Sally again and again and again and again in the background as we were trying to think. But the back room was ours and we had this little control room and we set up, a couple of ADATs and, cheap Mackie mixing board and started to record all these downtown musicians. And, I just hung around there. And then finally, I guess one of the big holding blocks for me had always been that, I, in my delusion, imagined that I was serious about running a record label, whereas Jeff, who was still wanting to be a musician, wasn't really serious about it because he really wanted to be a musician. And like this record label thing was like a side project. So I kept kind of pushing him like, are you ready to, really commit and really run this label? Or, you want to still be, star kind of thing? Because we're both going to have to really pitch in. And he was always like, yeah, man, because Jeff is just much more, shall we say, vague or laissez-faire than I am. And he was like, yeah, I'm ready. Cool, whatever, But anyway, one day and this was sort of 1999, I guess, I was just kind of done with the law thing. And he had sent me a tape. So these guys, his brother, Eric, had started a band that later became Soul Live. And I think on their first day of getting together, they had recorded an EP in a barn in Vermont, and we're actually inside a house in Vermont, Eric's mother's house, Jeff's mother's house too. They did it in the living room, and Jeff sent it to me. He's like, you got to check this out. This is like amazing. And it was like this whole take on boogaloo, jazz, Jimmy Smith kind of world, but like really, really cool and fresh and just amazing musicians playing it. And I've always, loved jazz and that kind of thing too. And I was just like, God, man, this is it. This has got something. Like, we should just sign these guys and start it. And he was like, okay. And so I quit. And literally I moved, there was no time off or anything. I didn't have any money saved. It wasn't like we had anything prepared. I literally just quit, then went down to the place that I had been spending nights and weekends at, sat at the reception desk, put a computer there, and we're like, we're Velour Records. And so that was it. We said we were a record label. And so we recorded Soul Live at that studio and then proceeded to have the craziest situation. I mean, the band had been starting to tour. Jeff's uncle is a good, well-known booking agent. So he picked them up. Now they're touring, starting to get some heat, starting to get some press. All of a sudden, Blue Note and Verve get in this bidding war over the band. And we, of course, like, here's a lawyer guy here, right? I had signed them to a 1-record deal, which is, of course, unheard of because you get completely screwed when somebody else goes to sign them. And I did it because we didn't have any money. We had no money. We had no money to pay them in advance. All we could do was just basically afford to pay for the record we made with them. So 1-record deal. Now Blue Note and Verve are in a bidding war, and Jeff and I are just kind of like, oh, no, we've lost, the band, we lost them. Now we have nothing on our label. And so, kind of miserable and, honestly caused some tension between Jeff and his brother, as you can imagine. And they were, anyway, long story short, Verve loses, Blue Note wins. They sign with Blue Note. They're off our label. We're depressed for about a month, but somewhere along the way, Bruce Lundvall, who's a gem of a human being, he's passed in the meantime, but he, as the head of Blue Note, wants to go to Japan. And he goes to Japan to tell his Japanese partners at Toshiba EMI this amazing new band they've signed and all the new artists. And he takes the only thing he can take, our record, and he gives it to the Toshiba EMI people, and they lose their shit. They think it's the greatest like reinvention of jazz they've ever heard in their lives. And next thing we know, they're calling us up saying like, we want to buy. And I think it was like they bought in the end over 100,000 records from us directly. And at this point, it was me and Jeff and an intern and a rented reception area desk with Mustang Sally still playing in the background, one control room. And, you know, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue coming. We couldn't afford to press the records because there were orders coming in. We didn't have the cash to even manufacture them, to send them over to Japan. So it was like one of these things where it was just, you know, it's just blind luck, I suppose, maybe, you know, some luck in finding the band, obviously maybe some skill in recognizing that Soul Lab was as good as they were, which they definitely were and are, but you know, just crazy good fortune. So that tale is really the beginning of our days as a record label. It was the high point also for a couple of years where the thing tended to go up and down quite a bit. So yeah.
If I remember from Jeff's story correctly, after 911, your studio was not far from there, and that kind of shifted the focus away from just being a record label to doing something a little bit more community oriented. Was that your experience as well?
Yeah. I mean, we had the same experience. Jeff tells that story, I think, so eloquently. My memories of it are similar for sure. I mean, the tragedy, I mean, I was asleep and the planes flew right over my head. I was living on Sullivan Street at the time, and literally it goes straight into where the World Trade Center was when you look down. So I like walked out my door at 8:57 and looked down and, you know, saw the whole thing. And, you know, our offices were down on Murray Street. So 47 Murray Street, which was in that exclusion zone. So when the towers tragically came down, we were shut out for many months. And I remember returning to the office and everything was coated in like, you know, a half centimeter of dust, you know, from all of it. And it was a crazy time. And so it was 4 or 5 months before we got back there. But yeah, I mean, I think it definitely shifted things. I think the main thing though that actually shifted things was it's sort of a tangentially related to it. So Skylar, Jeff's wife, opened her yoga studio on top 2 floors up from us because all the buildings were vacant because of, you know, obviously who the hell wanted to be down there after that. And so we recommended to our landlord that Skylar, you know, we were told Skylar, take a look, and he rented it to her. So the first thing that happened was we had this burgeoning yoga mindfulness scene appearing 2 floors up from our record label. And, you know, that naturally led to some cross pollination, interchange, and just hanging out and, you know, dropping in on classes and all that sort of stuff. And then, you know, the question as to why yoga started to explode then, which is a whole nother thing. And I mean, I do think that, you know, people were definitely looking for a place and a way to heal in difficult and traumatic times. And, you know, there's no doubt in New York, at least, and probably in other places as well, the yoga studio is a great place to do that. And that spirit of community and also just sort of being in your body and the stillness of your mind, I think it really helps. It helped a lot of people. So, you know, we had this little bit of a, you know, your chocolate and my peanut butter thing going on with, you know, this kind of wild late night lifestyle record label on floor 2 and this mindful community focused yoga space on floor 4. And I guess we would meet in floor 3. And sometimes the thing that came out of it were just, you know, some interesting, I guess, maybe a reimagination of what, you know, being a yogi or a spiritual person in the modern world is, or on the other side of it, like finding balance between, you know, a late night hard partying lifestyle and something more meaningful and grounded in yoga. But all those ideas and cross currents took a few years to pollinate, but eventually led to Wanderlust. There's no doubt. I don't think it would have happened, but for the physical proximity of those 2 spaces and those 2 centers called, you know, community centers.
What was the timing between the first conversation around this, let's do something, and the event actually happening? And then talk a little bit about the pressure of not having sold enough tickets, and was it luck that brought the people, or what do you attribute that to looking back now?
Yeah. I mean, geez. So there was a lot of pressure, but I don't know. I mean, I remember mostly just feeling incredibly excited at those time periods. I mean, I felt like we were doing something new and weird, but cool, right? I mean, this idea of, I mean, in my head, and of course, I always had a slightly different take. I'm not really, I never have been a, a hardcore yogi. I'm kind of a casual practitioner in that way. I mean, for me, I was really interested in this idea of reinventing a festival experience for grown-ups and really also bringing in this idea of something deeper and more meaningful than just partying, I suppose. And so, whether that was being in nature for me or the talks and lectures or, the healthy food and all of that, of course, the yoga classes and the meditation. But for me, it was like a very much a combined vision of what a balanced life could be in a box that was, well, I mean, one of the most beautiful containers around, right? Lake Tahoe or, Whistler and so I guess for me, it was the way I kind of came at it was a little bit different than maybe say like Skylar, who obviously is so, deep into her practice. But, I just remember being so excited about, this idea of, wow, people say this sounds really weird when I tell them about this idea. Yeah, we're bringing all these top bands together and they're going to play this thing. And then we're bringing all these incredible yoga teachers. And everyone's like, what? Why? Because it just really hadn't been done. And I think a lot of people viewed yoga at that time as it was still viewed very much through a sacred lens. And not to say that it isn't also viewed that way now. I think it is. But at that time, it was sort of, there was this whiff of, the yogi in his cave, asceticism, self-denial, certainly not like community celebration, dancing into, the morning hours. And, combining those things, I think just, I don't know. I just remember being very excited about the prospect of it. And, we did it. And then, of course, like all those completely flopped, it was like the first year was, I would say it flopped from the sense of what we thought we were building. I thought we were building this accessible thing to represent a new vision for, what like a modern life for a 30 something could be, like this idea of like, yeah, I'm, sure there's a little detox and there's a little retox and there's community and there's celebration, there's arts and there's inspiration. There's also like serious practice and exercise and there's, healthy living. And there's like a lot of elements to it that I just was like, kind of, this is, I mean, it all sounds like, duh, this is what everyone does now. But at that time, it was a little different. And yeah, I mean, the problem was that none of the people we expected to buy the music tickets or the tickets to the event came. Like the hardcore people who we had the best indie rock, lineup. It was just an incredible lineup in our first year. And literally nobody bought the tickets. Nobody came. Even the people like, we didn't make it like you had to do the yoga. God forbid. Like we couldn't force it. You could just go to the shows at night or on a mountaintop. We reenacted what Bill Graham had done in 1991 legendarily, putting a concert on top of a mountain. It was incredible, and nobody came except for the yogis. The yogis came, they thought it was amazing, but they were disappointed that the music was happening during the yoga. So basically we were just like kind of our minds were blown. We lost a ton of money and weren't sure where to go. But I guess the one thing we realized is like, well, we found an audience that's passionate. It's like people who love yoga want this event. They just want the music at night. They want to do yoga all day long. We can do that event. So we came back in year two with a much revised, a much, much smaller music lineup, therefore much more, economically feasible. And this time it blew up and the music people came at night. This was the funny thing too. It's like they all came. Like I guess they had gotten over their fear of like, well, this is too weird, or it's not for me, or I don't know what all this yoga is doing at my music festival. I just want to drink beers. I don't know what happened or what changed from year one to year two, but yeah, I mean, fear. I remember being afraid. We had partners at that time. I would say Jeff and I, like we were fortunate to partner with the guys from C3 Presents, which is just like Austin City Limits, and they do Lollapalooza, like Charlie Walker and Charles Attal and Charlie Jones, those three down there. And then we partnered also with Corin Capshaw, who's like literally a legend in the music business. And they were the capital partners. So, the thing I was most afraid of is that they were going to be like, great, you lost me a lot of money. We're done. See you later. But they were I mean, the good news about being with music industry veterans is they're pretty good at losing a lot of money. They're used to it. It happens a lot when you first start a new event. And then they also know, hey, year two, year three, it all then comes around. And so they were cool. And they were like, yeah, we're going to have to cut costs next year. We're going to have to reimagine what needs to happen. But clearly there was something there. So yeah, that is what happened. But the adrenaline of it all still makes me jumpy to think about now. It was just so intense starting your own thing.
What do you think your capital partners were really investing in you and Jeff? What did they see within you all that that gave them the confidence that even though we lost a ton of money, we're going to eventually turn a profit?
Well, they went, I mean, Corin never came, but Charlie and Charles came and went to the event, and I mean, mostly they played golf, which is they smoked cigars and played golf. They're both, by the way, hardcore yogis now. And this is actually, I mean, if you want to really go deeper, like they were both hard partying dudes who were, not on a sustainable path, shall we say, of good living. And so the interesting thing is, like, I think the investment in Wanderlust maybe never made them a lot of financial money, but I think it might have saved both of their lives, in all honesty. Like, they're both incredible. I mean, Charlie is like healthier than I am now. I mean, he's so fit and so into this stuff. He came to Eudemonia. He's also invested in Eudemonia, but he's like really transformed. But as far as us, like, I think it was just, Charlie Walker said, the currency of festivals or something like the currency of festivals smiles. Like, you can walk around the festival and look at people's faces and like, are they smiling? Are they happy? And one thing I can say that Wanderlust, it's hard to find at its peak. It would be hard to find anywhere on the planet where you have more happy, kind of glowing, open, just really peaking people. And he saw that, walking around. He saw that and it's like, whatever this is, I don't really understand it, because at that point, certainly wasn't doing any yoga, but you could see there was something there. So actually, I mean, maybe it was about us. I think he thinks we're smart and competent people, but I really do think it was actually more about the reaction of the people, and that it was fulfilling some kind of really important human need. The other thing I always think about is like the timing of that light. Like, Wanderlust happened right after the collapse of 2008, the great financial. We started it and raised money in the end of 2008. And then 2009 was when it all went to shit. And so many people lost their jobs. The economy was like terrible. So many people became yoga teachers because they lost their jobs, and they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to like practice because it makes me feel better. And they went and did their teacher training. And that also, I think, drove the explosion of yoga as a cultural force in the country. So there were other factors that, go way beyond us that happened to be lining up with our growth.
Can you talk about some of the moments where you had to improvise in the early days of Wanderlust, when things didn't go the way that they were supposed to go according to plan? And you had to, there's a rumor about some misprinted yoga mats and, things like that, stories like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, geez, in the first year, we had worked so hard and were, desperately. We had booked Franti as our headliner. And the day before, he was scheduled to headline the festival. So like the biggest name we booked of, probably 50 bands, but he was definitely the main draw. He got appendicitis and went to the hospital and had his appendix removed. And so we were left without a headliner. So that was crazily stressful. I remember kicking around with all the guys on an emergency meeting, in the afternoon on I think the Friday. He was supposed to headline on the Saturday. And here's another area where surrounding yourself by music industry veterans is like a pretty good thing, because, Charles Attal, I remember, was just like, okay. It's like, I'll just get on the phone. And he walks off, starts lighting up his cell phone. And, within, I think 8 hours, he had found Common, who stepped up and came in and replaced us, which was just amazing good fortune. I mean, you got to fly across the country and organize your band. I mean, there's so many logistics to this, but he did it, and it sort of saved the day, and people were receptive. I mean, the 120 people who came were receptive to that change. But yeah, I mean, there have been a numbers on the ways. I mean, God, we've suffered through smoke conditions. We've had storms tear apart, our geodome. Remember, we had those giant geodomes. You'll remember them well, right? Like, that tore the skin off the thing. We've had, injuries. We've had inappropriate touching and potential quasi-sexual harassment. We've had so many things there, things that are also well-known side effects of the yoga guru business. We've had a lot of things happen, but I think on the other hand, in the grand scheme of it, like you look at these festivals, I mean, there are times when I just like also think we're lucky. I remember being on late night with Girl Talk DJing in the parking lot when we had like 4,000 people there. And I was on the stage with a bunch of people and we were jumping, and the whole stage was jumping up and down. And I remember thinking dimly in my head, like, this could be one of those moments where, you read about these nightmare concert industry story where the stage collapses and like 4 people are killed and like your career's over and you go to jail or something, horrible, horrible, not to mention the like. And so like there are a lot of moments like that where I think, oh, we just kind of got lucky. But at the same time, knock on wood, or I guess I don't have to knock on wood anymore since I'm not doing it any longer. But that nothing major ever happened. It was always, I mean, nothing significant. Nobody hurt seriously. Nobody, God forbid, nobody died. Maybe that's a testament to running a health and wellness program. I mean, we had over 100,000 people coming to our events at our peak in 20 countries. And you think about that, for 9, 10, 12 years, that was happening. And, so that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have gone to Wanderlust, hiked, climbed, done yoga, practiced, run, all the things we do, on mountainsides. And somehow nobody ever got really hurt. It's amazing, actually, if I think about it, and I'm grateful for it. I almost died once, but other than that, no, I mean, literally, I almost fell off a cliff. Like, a friend of mine literally saved my life doing it. Grabbed me when I was pitching black off a cliff. I'd lost my balance hiking. But, it's amazing. Like we've been lucky, blessed, I suppose you would say.
If you're tired of trying to change, but you fall off the wagon and start over and repeat that process every few months, my latest book, The Year You Transform, can be your guide to adopting the most sustainable path to transformation. With 10 powerful 7-day challenges and a proven roadmap, this book will give you all the tools you need to transform one small win at a time. Get your copy at theyearyoutransform.com. All right. So you had the experience of being an attorney and feeling like that wasn't for you. And now you've had the experience of creating this really amazing event, hundreds of thousands of people's lives being positively affected, and then reaching a point where it seemed like it was time to transition. So were the feelings similar inside as back in the law firm days, or were they different feelings? Like, how do you know if you on paper are living your passion, your purpose, you're creating these amazing things? How do you know it's time to move on?
Yeah. I mean, I think Wanderlust told me it was time to go more than I ever told it. It was time to go in a lot of ways. I mean, I think what happened is that, well, first of all, we reached, and there was a clear moment, I guess, in 2015, we raised money and we did that conscious of like, wow, we have this great growing company. We want to bring it to more people. I think the motivations were good. It was also up until that point, to be honest, very unstable and difficult for me and Jeff financially. I mean, it was never a very lucrative business. It had a lot of success and a lot of kind of cultural currency, but it never made a lot of money. I had a lot of partners. So even if it had, it would go to them more than to us. And so we ended up needing to restructure. And, so we took a bunch of money from a group in New York, and they were positive. They were believers in the vision. They believed in health and wellness. They thought that Wanderlust could become not just an event series, but also, as we did, like a media brand. It could be, the voice of a generation of people who are, trying to improve their health and wellness and to live a meaningful and purposeful life, I suppose, for lack of a better word, in the modern age. And I think that promise was there. But we took the money and started to scale. And, there's just pressures at that point, a lot of pressures. There's the pressure to perform. There's a massive expansion of staff and things you're doing, workload. Suddenly we had up to 80 employees at one point, and it's like, I got to this place where I didn't even really, had been so collegial, and like the people who were on at Wanderlust were like, they were all in my wedding and they were all like my friends, and then all of a sudden it wasn't like that. It was something else.
This is the
And
Williamsburg office days.
yeah, this is exactly the Williamsburg office. And then the other thing was that I guess, I really believe that events like Wanderlust, I mean, if Wanderlust is sort of the event experience is the beating heart, it is this very personal, high touch, almost emotional, certainly quasi spiritual experience for the people who attend. And to be able to produce not one, not three, but 40 of them or 60 something of them around the world and not lose something in the process, I think is actually impossible. And so I think in some ways we tried to scale into media, and I think that would have been a much more natural thing to grow and scale and get large, but it didn't totally work. And what ended up happening was we ended up scaling more in events. And then that didn't totally work, in my opinion, either. I just think something of the magic was lost. And it became kind of a grind. Then I think you got to 2019, we started having to, Jeff left the company. That was also incredibly difficult personally for me and him. I mean, he's my best friend and, remains my best friend, but it was really, really difficult. Like, I don't know how to quite describe it, but it was a very painful period, I think, for both of us.
What was that
And
conversation like between you and Jeff?
I mean, it was like 100 conversations over 2 years, 3 years. It was a slow moving thing. I mean, Jeff was more reluctant than I was to, enter into the venture deal and to do that. And I think, he probably always to some degree regretted it. But I think also none of the stuff that did ensue that was good would have happened without it either. But it just changed. It couldn't be as personal anymore. And, Jeff and obviously Skylar has been very involved in the thing too from the get go. And so it was, the two of them, I think, Wanderlust was perhaps more directly connected to their identity than it ever was for me. For me, it was like I saw this beautiful vision, but the beautiful vision was external to who I'm here. Wanderlust is there. I think they were in it. And I think that was harder in some ways for them. But yeah. And so then, when Jeff left, obviously that also, even though it had not been easy between us over the last couple of years, just because when the company starts to hit walls and barriers, it just puts tension on everything, right? It's not anyone's fault. It's like, okay, we're not performing. The guys with the money are saying they're not going to give us more money unless we do X, Y, or Z. That's not fun, right? That's just not fun. And, so a lot of that stuff started happening and that caused tension. And then, he left and I continued to run the company. And then it was really 2019 was an extremely tough year. And it was all about like trying to restructure, and it was super painful. And we had to let a bunch of people go and tried to refocus on what I sort of saw as like, what's the magic? The magic is these festivals, right? And a few of them. So we were going to come back in 2020 with I suppose it was a vision that was much more pure and close to what the original, 2012, 2013 version of Wanderlust would have been. And then COVID hit. And it was just like the period from 2018 to 2019 was like the hardest professional period. I mean, I probably had to personally let go like 60 people in the company during that period. And it was just awful. I mean, awful, like awful for me, awful for them. And then I've had this final moment of like, I had found new investors. The thing was coming around to being a stable vision to what I think at least living up to the integrity and the values and the authenticity that I think we always wanted to have. And then COVID happened, sort of was like a 1-2 punch. And man, that was, I guess, different for me because the first part had been anguish for me in 2019, but 2020 was like, whoa, this isn't in my control at all. There's nothing I can do about this. There's like a virus sweeping the world. We can't gather. No one can gather. I'm sitting here and actually in this very property, like looking out, and I guess it was the first moment I felt like from the start of 1999, Velour starting the record label with Jeff through 2019, the end of 2019 of like closing out Wanderlust. And then, only 3 months later in March of 2020 was when COVID hit and the brakes just got slammed on by the world. I feel like it was the first time in 20 years I was forced to stop and consider what the hell that I'm doing with my life and why I'm actually here. Like, because the rest of it had just been kind of like entrepreneurial, like go. And of course, in service to causes I still deeply believe in. And, I think we're really good for humanity, but still just go.
Yeah.
And then stop.
Hey, really quickly, if you like this content or if you don't like it, let me know down in the comments, because your likes and comments are going to help me learn what you want more of. And then that way I can keep bringing you the good stuff. All right. Thanks so much for your feedback, and back to the show. So after going through a couple of rounds, at least, of fundraising as a mindful business, or maybe, I don't know if you identify as a spiritual person, but what are some of the considerations when you're dealing with the money people that you learn the hard way? That one, if someone's listening to this and they're right about to go into these meetings and try to raise money for their meditation app or their plant medicine platform or whatever the thing is, what do they need to know?
So what do they need to know? I mean, you need to know that if your business is purpose driven, as ours was, if you have a higher mission that goes beyond making money, that you can never swerve from that. And as soon as you swerve from that, you're pretty much guaranteed to fail, because the community of people who are believing in you and buying that story, like, you will be outed at some point if that's not who you really are. And it's okay, by the way. I don't even judge. It's fine. If you're starting an app because you want to make money and put bread on your table, I have absolutely no problem with that. But just don't say that you're doing it to change the betterment of humanity or to bring more meditation in the world if you're not. And so I think that's an easy one, and that's just authenticity, and that's charity anywhere. But I guess I would say that, I don't blame the money guys at all in our case. Like, I think everything we did to ourselves. And not because we were trying, I don't think we lost our values. I don't think we did it for the wrong reasons. But I think that somewhere along the way, what we didn't question is, why be big? Why be bigger? Is it better to be bigger? And was there something inherent about it? And of course, like, I remember Jeff and I having all these like late night discussions of like, well, it's like we could reach 10 million people, and like these ideas are transformational, and like we could be a force to, change the future of human culture, in a positive way. And I mean, lofty, big goals. And sure, that's true. We could have been, but you could also find that you overexpanded, you lost the magic, and you're not helping anybody as deeply as you did the 3,000 people or 30,000 people you helped in, 2015. And I think that, unfortunately, there is an allure to bigness that is inherent in the human mind, and perhaps anyone who's ever run a business. And the problem is, you really need a why for that. Like, you need a why. Why be big? What really is going to be better? What is going to improve? It's not about the money. What exactly is better about it? And, I don't think we asked ourselves that question. At least we didn't answer it sufficiently in my looking back on it. So
once you go down that road and you start taking money, is it easy to I'm sure it's not easy, but is it possible to kind of come back to the why, the bigger why, or are you kind of in the race now and you're on the treadmill and you have to play the game?
Well, it depends. We were lucky enough to be in a situation where there was no particular time rush. There was no like, oh, the fund's exiting in 2 years, and if you haven't tripled your EBITDA, and then you're like, there's none of that. It was actually, hey guys, here's some money. Work with my team to figure out where you might be able to grow and put this money to good use to expand it and go from there. I think where it becomes a problem is you really only get one, maybe you get two swings at it if you're lucky, but the money always goes faster than you think. And if the things you choose to invest in don't work, they don't yield returns, then there isn't necessarily any more money, and you no longer are in control of the company. So that's where the problem is. It's like I guess, to some extent, it's like if we had nailed it, from the get go in 2015 when they had, invested in the company and we had deployed all that capital and, let's say two of the things worked and one of them didn't, it would have been fine. But, the fact is that apart from the events, none of the other parts of the business were profitable. And then you start to run out of money. Then you need more money. When you need more money, then you have a real problem. So that's what I would say the warning would be, is that it's like fine to take it. Just be aware that if you don't have a very clear picture of what to do with the money and how to deploy it well, you're going to find yourself in trouble and not in control anymore. And, that's what happened ultimately to both Jeff and me. First to Jeff, then to me. That's the lesson.
Were people offering to buy a Wanderlust from you before COVID?
Yeah, quite a few. Yeah. We had a number of substantial offers with some very big companies. And of course, we were turning them all down.
Do you regret that decision or no? Looking at how things played out?
I mean, I guess from a financial perspective, I would have, done better for sure. But I don't really regret it because I think those deals all had strings of their own. And I mean, the one thing I can say is that, at least through 2018 for Jeff and through 2019 for me, like we did maintain operational and visionary control over the event and what it was and the brand. And of course, we started to have more and more restrictions from financial reasons and other things on us, but like it was still our company. And I think it would have changed, the moment it got sold, and maybe we would have gone off and done something else. But, that whole mentality of serial entrepreneurs and, you hear every tech bro that you probably ever talked to was like, oh, this is my fourth exit and all that stuff. It's like, that was never how either of us thought about this thing. It was never about an exit. It was never about any of that. It was about what we were doing in the present moment and whether this was meaningful and fulfilling for us and other people or not. And so being in control is very important, I think, in that case, in that scenario.
How do you know if you have a partner like you and Jeff, how do you know because no partnership is going to be perfect. You're not going to be 100% on the same page with everything. So how do you know when it's an aligned partnership versus something to consider, maybe buying someone out or going your separate ways or things like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that
there was a lot in that.
Yeah, there's a lot in that. I mean, it's not like I wish there was a bright line test for it, like a litmus test or something. You can it's purple. I don't think it's all right. A mood ring. No, I mean, I think, geez, I mean, in my case with Jeff, I think we both pushed each other a lot. I think he has skills that I lack, probably vice versa. And I think that was fairly clear to both of us. And where there's something complementary that you can, sort of your skill sets add to greater than the sum of the parts, I think that is actually quite clear when that happens. Like I have a great dude I work with now, Tyler, who is, just unbelievably skilled at, sort of human connection and making relationships and networking and therefore selling sponsorships also. But he's so good at it and so much better than I would ever be at it. And, it's just, you have to be, I suppose, humble enough to recognize when you encounter someone with that said. And, going back to the beginning of the conversation where I always felt like I was a generalist. I mean, I guess the one advantage I have in that way is that I'm always looking for someone who's better than me at this thing and waiting to replace myself effectively because I found the guy who's really better at design or really better at branding or really better at, sponsorship sales. So that's part of it. But I think at the core, I mean, Jeff and I are like brothers, it's like we've just gone through so much and had so many years of just like, it's so deep personally that, there's that too. So it was primarily a personal relationship, not a business relationship. And that makes it more complicated at times, but I think it makes it much harder to do what you're talking about, like knowing that moment of when to stop. It's sort of like knowing the moment of when you should leave your wife. It's like, I don't know, that there's usually not one moment, it's sort of a series of things that break down and leave you feeling unfulfilled. But I mean, the other thing about it is that I think it's another one of those things that's turned out to be a blessing because, I mean, Jeff has done incredible work with Commune and, that whole platform is just amazing. And he has been able to, I think, flourish and expand his horizons, become successful podcaster as well and writer. And, that would have been harder to do in the context of our partnership, not because I would have tried to prevent him, but just more that, there was other co-CEO duties that would have taken up a ton of his time. And similarly for me, as you could probably tell from the conversation, like the guy who wanted to be a scientist, it's like when I was able to start Eudemonia and really sort of weave together science and spirituality and, sort of both elements of that into one event, that really for me has been personally fulfilling.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about eudaimonia now. But my question is, what were the ideas that didn't go anywhere that you thought of before you locked in on eudaimonia? Because I'm sure you're always thinking of ideas and like, oh, that'll be interesting.
You're right, but for me, Eudemonia was an unfulfilled vision. I mean, and I'll take you back to it. I mean, so there's two things actually. I will say, like, I had, as much as, I don't want to call it a spiritual awakening because like the way I even think about things is probably different than some, but that whole period in COVID where the world ground to a stop right after that whole emotionally exhausting, arduous period of restructuring. I remember looking out here and, noticing, as I'm sure you did and many people did, like the pollution disappeared from the sky and suddenly the sky was bluer than it had ever been. The air was cleaner. Animals literally started coming out of the woods more because there was no traffic and no cars. And there was this real sense that nature, I mean, as clear as nature could ever tell you or speak to you, I had this moment of like, oh, wow, I am supposed to be slowing down and appreciating this. I'm supposed to be stopping now. And so, I spent about a year, 2 years really just working on Wanderlust TV, which of course had flourished as a platform and, just doing that digital business because that was really all we could do. And to be honest, it was not, if you compare the pace of that in those 2 years compared to the pace of the prior 20, it was the easiest, softest. I spent so much time with my kids. I spent so much time in the woods. I took up mountain biking. I ended up moving to New Hampshire, to the countryside, and with my whole family. And I just let myself still out for a while. And so, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't trying to come up with the next business idea. I was ticking along, enjoying a bucolic country life and thinking that the world had seemed healthier and ironically than it had ever seemed to me before during this, pandemic, just largely because of the effects of what it did. And so anyway, it wasn't that it was a great time of intellectual fertility for me at all. It was sort of the opposite. It was like a oneness. And then the thing that never left my head though was Wellspring. And I was trying to remember, did you go to Wellspring? Yeah. Okay, you did. I thought you did. And that for me was like, that was an event that was very much, my baby. And I developed that with Karina, my wife, but who programmed the whole thing. But the concept there was this idea of sort of a holistic view of wellness, looking at, obviously personal wellness, but also interpersonal wellness, relationships, love, and then also what I kind of thought of as global wellness, or which might be everything from environmentalism to, social progress to all sorts of things. And it was really a lofty event, but it was very much the predecessor and the sort of spiritual father, for lack of a better word, for Eudemonia. And it was, obviously you'll remember, it was very ideas driven, although we had a whole practice and, physical component. And the thing was that because that happened at the end of 2018, right before the dark days of 2019, as I've explained, I was never able to repeat it. And I knew there was something there that it sat in my head for 5 years that like this was a tragedy, that this was an event that needed to happen, that it needed to come back. And so culture had evolved. I had evolved. Some of the ideas evolved, but I will say that event was very much predecessor of Eudemonia and just an idea, a passion of mine that I just never could let go. And so that's really how it came about. Different name, some slightly different context. in the meantime, the post-COVID, ironically, right? The post-COVID rise of podcasters, such as yourself, has been one of the sort of, I guess, the rise of celebrity podcasters, particularly in the health and wellness space, is, of course, one of the things that has made it possible to gather thousands of people around health and wellness conversation. And so that all happened post-COVID too. Like if I had tried to do it in 2018, I don't even know if it would have worked because there wasn't yet the audience. But, COVID sent everybody listening to their podcasts. And, it's like you look at Huberman didn't even exist as a podcaster until right after COVID. And he just blew up. His numbers blew up. And it's true for many people. And so it was taking some of the ideas of Wellspring, which I just thought was an amazing event, and really trying to bring it into, 2024, 2025. And that was it. Maybe you only have two good ideas in your life and you just got to keep doing them again. So that's my philosophy, maybe.
Talk about the name, because it's not easy to spell. It's not easy
or
to pronounce. Yeah. And I'm sure people try to talk you out of it, but how do you know when it's the right name?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the jury's still out on that one, but I sometimes stumble over the words too, so no one should feel bad about that. I guess the idea of life well lived, or, this Greek philosophical concept of human flourishing, or the highest human good, it might be translated as, it's an extremely compelling concept because it encompasses obviously the building blocks, like lower down on Maslow's pyramid, that, you've got to have safety and you've got to have food and you got to have clothes and then maybe you get love and whatever. But, so you can't be ill and your body has to be in shape, but it's obviously much higher than that. And that's one of the things that I loved about it, which is like, yes, it's a health and wellness conference, but it's not just about, what supplements to take and, I suppose what exercises to do and how to meditate and all the things that are building and how much sleep you should get and, whether you should eat meat or mostly plants. It's actually about finding personal fulfillment. First of all, building that strong base, and then moving up towards finding, like, what is my purpose in life? What is my meaning in life? How do I foster better relationships? How do I experience, deeper community? That concept I just thought was wonderful. And like, even though I guess I called it Eudemonia because that's where I want to go. Where we are is, I think, a little bit lower down in the building blocks of the thing. I mean, it is still a lot of brands that, a lot of great speakers and people that are going to help you optimize your mental and your physical health. But this year, you'll see there's a little more philosophical woven in. We have people like Arthur C. Brooks talking about the concept of eudaimonia. We have other folks that are, I think slightly of a more philosophical bent. And, I think over time, that's where I would like to go with it. And I just found it really compelling. Now, also, it's a goddamn weird name and a weird word. And when I told my partner, Charlie Walker, the man who has found yoga and healthy living since his debaucherous days of Wanderlust, he was like, "What do you want to call it?" And I was like, "Well, I've been doing around this idea for this event name, and it's calling it Eudemonia." He like paused for a beat. He says, "I think I caught that once." So I was like, okay, so it sounds like a disease. Great. So it's a ringing endorsement. But anyway, I think that sometimes with names, and my theory on branding is that, first of all, it's very hard to find a name now that is trademarkable and all the lawyer shit that I won't bore you with, but that's another thing. But having a really weird name, I've always had this theory about humans too. Like if you bestow a very strange name on your child, and it forces them almost in the world to become a bit more of an individual, to have to answer to their otherness in some ways. And I feel like there's something like that in brand names, which is that forcing people, they can't pronounce it or whatever. At first, it's a liability, but then it becomes almost like a secret handshake later on. So hopefully that will happen. We're not there yet, by the way, but not even close. But that's what I hope.
Well, let's talk about the culture of Eudemonia. Who's the avatar when you're curating the experience? And what is that experience like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think of the audience, certainly the people who would want to come, as I call them in my head, wellness seekers, where, I mean, they're, and I guess just to be distinguished, at this point in time, the word wellness is perhaps the most overused word in the English language. So, obviously everybody wants to be well, but the seeker part, I think, is the more important. It's people who are kind of restless in their path towards self-optimization, self-improvement, greater health. So that encompasses people who have been ill and who are trying to not be ill. It encompasses people who are not at all ill, but are trying to optimize. People who maybe a lot of people who are struggling with close relationships with people. Maybe their father has Alzheimer's, or maybe, their kids has autism. So you have a lot of folks in that, but it's the seeking part. It's like the people who are intellectual curious, people who are willing to try new things and are open-minded, I suppose, about what practices might improve their lives. And whether that's, the food they eat, or the meditation practice they have, or, a physical fitness routine, or some supplement they take. And so that's who I'm trying to speak to. And I think that the interesting thing about it is that, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot in recent years, Light, is that the world has become extremely politicized, and the world of health and wellness has become politicized too. And it's like almost like a tribalism that's happening between, people who are rejecting big pharma and people who are basically pointing out the idiocy of not having any relationship or not ever using, the advances of modern medicine. And I think what's really interesting is that tribalism and that split is something that I have a little bit of a calling to try to heal in some ways. And I feel like both because the mission of human health is too important for us to argue about it, also because human health and biology is too varied. In other words, the same drug might have a completely different effect on me as on you. The same practice might have a different effect on me as on you. We are all so biologically individual that it's really a silly thing to get dogmatic about health. I think it's one of the most ridiculous things to get dogmatic about it. It's like not even, it makes no sense. And then I think that the other factor is that community and this idea of the breakdown of one-on-one IRL experiences. I mean, if there's anything that I took away from Wanderlust, it's just that how healing it is to be around people who are revealing their essential goodness, who share your interests, who are fascinated and alive and energized by the same things you are, and how that in itself is healing. And that so much of this today now, this kind of toxic conversation that happens is taking place online, and just it doesn't happen in person. And in person, it's a very different thing. So, you sort of mix all that up together, and I think there's a really powerful experience that I think is what really, in my mind at least, what I think the world needs right now more of. Not it particular, but it needs more of these types of experiences where people can interact and they can feel safe to disagree and they can express what they've learned. And you could say, oh, that didn't work for me. But I mean, that's sort of what I'm trying to create. It's like a place for conversation, a place for community, a place for discussion, a place, yes, for science, but a place for things that aren't yet proven to also be discussed, because we need to find a place for that too. And, a lot of things that are, I think if you look at, it's amazing. Like take meditation, which obviously I know is near and dear to your heart. I mean, we're talking a thousands of year old practice that only in the last, 30 years did there start to be modern medical and Western science that started to really and prove that the benefits are real, physiological, and not just in someone's, spiritual imagination. And so I think there are many things out there that fall in that category if we're open and receptive to them. But at the same time, it is important that we can also apply science to them so that we can have some rigor about what works and what doesn't work. So, this is the goal. That's the experience. As far as what you do there, I think a typical day might be, you wake up on Friday morning. We have a wide range of activities. You might go down to the beach for a sunrise meditation, and there's like running outdoors. There's also indoors. We have, spinning and yoga classes and, strength training and, all sorts of, we had Jillian Michaels kicking people's ass last year, so you have a wide range of movement and things like of that nature, and also meditative practices. Then the day sort of segues, there's pauses for lunch, segues into ideas. We have 15 venues with, I think this year we're expecting over 120 speakers, people from Huberman and Hyman, but to people you've never heard of who are the PhD in this research university, or, a spiritual teacher. I mean, we have Robert Thurman coming, the Buddhist scholar. And so, there's so many different people to learn from. So hundreds of different sessions. wrapped in that, we have an expo, which this year will have about 120 of, I would call them the leading personal health tech brands. So it's everything from, seed microbiome companies to, personal fitness stuff to at-home testing to, God, I don't know. There's just a ton of different companies that are all sort of on the cutting edge of personal health and health products. Wearables, like my Aura, you can see I'm wearing two. Got a Whoop and an Aura, which is perhaps the sign of obsessiveness. And then there's treatments, which is the other thing too. It's like, so we have it's like a pop-up, modern high-tech spa and taking place across multiple rooms, everything from, PMF to, red light therapy to hyperbaric to, acupuncture to, it goes down a list, and you can drop into all of that stuff as a badge. And so your day is sort of spent, in this matrix between things you do and things you sweat and things you can try and things you can taste, and then of course things you can learn, and a lot of things you can learn, and you rinse and repeat that for 3 days. But I'm very happy you'll be there. It's an amazing experience.
And I think the people you connect with is probably the biggest benefit, just because a lot of people who are into this stuff are usually the only person in their friend circle who's like really into it, and you go there and it's like you're surrounded by. How many people are usually attending?
Well, we registered 2,750 last year. We're hoping to have 4,000 people this year. So we will see about that. But I feel pretty good about it. It seems like there's some buzz. Yeah, I agree with you. I think, there's two main ways I think people connect. Obviously people connect to each other. It's like very communal and open, embracing kind of crowd. And people are very easy to talk to. I met hundreds of people last year. It was really cool. But the other thing that's, I think, really cool is that, the experts, as we call them, people like you, they're roaming the halls. So what ends up happening is like just tons of impromptu talks between, you pop up and there's Mark Hyman rapping with somebody over there and you ask him a question. And, that kind of access to people who are leaders in various realms of wellness or philosophy or strength training or whatever it may be it's just really cool too. And it's sort of very, I go in my music days, I would think of it as artist in residence, where they'd be like, an artist would be at the same place for weeks on end and, kind of hanging out and playing and jamming at various times. It's sort of what it's like if you guys are the artists. So yeah, I think that's a really cool environment. And of course you're in West Palm Beach in November, which is not also a bad thing, a bad time to visit. It's just gorgeous down there then. So
speaking of which, what kind of experiences are available? Are there like artist passes? Do you do virtual? People want to tune in online or to be in person?
No. What did I coin the phrase? You have to be there to be present. We will release obviously some video of the event, more this year than we did last year, but nothing in real time. We just want people to come. I think it's worth coming for and worth taking the time to do it. And that's because the medicine is, as we discussed, it's in the community as much as in the ideas and the things you learn. But we try to keep it fairly simple. There's a 3-day pass and you buy your 3-day pass and you're good. There are some little enhancements. There's an enhanced version and a premium version. The premium version is just, kind of got some luxurious elements and, a concierge service and some seating and things like that. The enhanced version really is pretty similar, except for it includes a membership to Function Health, who's one of our key partners. And they do the blood biomarker testing. They test on, I think, 110 or over 110 different biomarkers and repeatedly over time and give you, with AI analysis, like a really good picture of what's going on inside your body. I love their stuff. Obviously, they're a partner too, but I'm using it right now along with my other devices. So yeah, so those are the way. But we try to keep it fairly simple. You show up, you get a room on site at the Hilton. Hopefully it's right above where it all takes place. We have some dinners and some social things. We're launching a clean food festival across the street, which hasn't fully been announced yet, but which will be a sort of a fun social hang in the evening on the Friday. So there's a bunch of things of that nature that we're doing and adding on the experience and kind of upgrading the nightlife element. But fundamentally, we try to keep it simple. I learned from Wanderlust. If you remember how complicated Wanderlust was to even get your ticket and then sign up for all these classes. And it was like, people were like, why does it have to be so hard? Can't I just show up and come? Yeah.
What about working with your partner or your wife? What advice do you have for people who are considering doing that in order to keep things I mean, I have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. I'm hoping that
I was about to say, don't do it. No, Karina is my rock and she is amazing. And, I will say it's been challenging. And when I spoke of my relationship with Jeff as a marriage, well, this one actually is a marriage.
Mhm.
And yet we are working. I mean, she works in the room right there and I work right upstairs from her. And we come together and make coffee in the kitchen or eat, last night's leftovers and then proceed to immediately talk about, who we're booking or what talent has been difficult or whatever. So it makes it a lifestyle rather than a job. I mean, we just live this. Our little house revolves around this event and the topics and the talent and the ideas, and it's just constant. And so sometimes that's tough. So I guess what I would say is, over the years, we've just gotten better. One thing that's just critical is that I just leave her alone. Like I give
Mm.
her her job. She books our talent. She's incredible at it. She forms amazing relationships. She finds amazing people. And I just don't get involved because she needs to have her lane. And the last thing you want is your husband looking over your shoulder, acting like a boss, right? So that's not at all. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is important is that, she's been going on retreats and taking time away. And I've been going away a little bit. I just actually went out to Jeff's and played tennis with him and some buddies for a couple of days in LA for, a couple of weeks ago. And I think, having some time apart is really critical too, if you're going to work as closely as we do. But I mean, it's amazing. I would say if you go back 4 or 5 years, I would say there are some times when I thought, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. It's really difficult. But I think we've really worked through it. And I think partly it's because we both figured out how to give each other space. But I think the other thing is that we're both incredibly passionate about what we're doing. And I think she loves it as much as I love it, and that's the other thing that always helps. I mean, if we were both working for I don't know, the Acme Shoe Corp down the road and trying to work from home, I think it would be a lot harder.
So Eudemonia is happening November 13th through the
13th through the 16th.
15th,
Yeah.
which is a weekend. And who are some of the more recognizable names that people listening will know?
Other than Light Watkins? Yeah, no, Andrew Huberman and Mark Hyman and Gabby Bernstein and Arthur Brooks and Dan Buettner. And then there's 100 more. And actually, we haven't announced 40 more. So there's a ton of other ones coming too that are not even on the lineup yet. So there's some really, it's a really good diverse thing. The concept is ambitious. Obviously, we're trying to cover the whole of human health in one conference. And obviously, that's a conceit. We're not going to really do that, but we are, there's workshops on psychedelics and mental health and, tech addiction. There's, obviously all sorts of physical training and during exercises of different kinds. There's, protein and muscle building. There's workshops on, almost every kind of aspect. So it's a very, very diverse lineup and will always be diverse, but never, I guess, could be diverse enough because it's a big topic.
I love it. Jeff will be there too, I see.
Yes, exactly. He's, I'm sure, going to be play hard to get with you, I'm sure, as usual. He's been incredibly generous. He's actually on the board of Eudemonia and has been kind of my sounding board as I've come through a lot of the ideas and concepts. It's actually, we were working together on naming it and we both had Eudemonia on our separate lists. And we discussed it for a while. It was actually, he who pushed me to actually push me over the edge to take it just because we were both talking about like how it's like the meaning of the word is just perfect, but the name, it's a little strange. And he was like, I think you should do it. I think it's the one. And so I went with his advice. So now I get to blame him if it turns out to be a terrible, terrible brand name.
Well, Sean Hess, great talking to you and hearing your story. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in November at Eudemonia. And whoever else is listening to this or watching this, definitely come. We'll put the website and everything in the show notes, but just for the record, it's Eudemonia, however you spell that, .net.
I'll spell it for you. Don't worry. Eudemonia.
There you go.
That's good. That's one of the other problems for sure. It doesn't make for easy radio.
Was the Instagram available? Eudemonia?
No, we did Eudemonia Summit. It wasn't actually because there's a bunch of like philosophical junkies who have squatted on the name across all social media platforms. I'm afraid it's not as easy as you might think. Light, it's a total pleasure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us this year. I'm just excited to work with you again after you are one of the few who've been to Wellspring and this. So I'm very excited to hear your take as you look at Wellspring 2.0 in Eudemonia form.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you resonated with this conversation and you want more, start by checking out this one. And otherwise, we've got an entire playlist of similar conversations. So make sure you're subscribed and please leave a comment letting me know which other guests you'd like for me to interview on this channel.